All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be continuing looking at the Machinist's subclass by going into the Tinkerer. Now, a quick reminder, if you are enjoying my videos, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All of those things are really, really important. So, we've been talking about the Machinist, and like I said, I think the Machinist class itself, as it is written, for the most part, I can't speak. It's a cool class. It's not groundbreaking or anything like that. It's remarkably similar to most gunslinger type classes, including Matt Mercer's gunslinger subclass for the fighter, which is actually on D&D Beyond. It lets you use firearms, which isn't something that is technically quote unquote enabled by default. In 5th edition D&D, they have rules for firearms and things like that have been expanded, especially once they introduced the Artificer, seen as Artificers tend to have a connection with firearms in general. But it's not part of your basic D&D. So over the years, a lot of people have made gunslinger-style subclasses. And this kind of fits there. You have a bunch of, effectively trick shots, which we call grazes here, that let you do some weird things to your enemies. The Machinist actually gets something a little bit different, where they have these inventions that they create that give them different abilities and things, which is kind of cool. But overall, it's an interesting, it's a fun class. Nothing groundbreaking, but they're, other than needing a few minor adjustments to just kind of get it working really well, for the most part, it's fine. The subclasses, as we talked about last time when we talked about the Marksman, are really underwhelming. Mostly because, like, the Marksman itself, we talked about, the Marksman is entirely passive. Almost every single thing the Marksman gets is a passive ability. You don't actually make a choice to do anything in your Marksman kit. It's all stuff where you just always do extra damage, or you have an easier time critting. But it was this just entirely passive subclass, which isn't really fun. So I made some suggestions to make it something a little bit more active, so that the Marksman is going to feel different than playing just a Machinist before you choose your subclass, and so it's going to feel different than the other two subclasses. The subclass we're covering today is the Tinkerer, which, when you look at, well, I guess we can go. We can start off with quick refresher on 5th edition class design. In 5th edition D&D, every class is designed to play very, very differently right from the beginning. In order to do that, every class has these things that we call defining features. A defining feature is either something unique to the class, or something maybe not unique, but the class gets earlier or can use in a different way than other classes. And in order for something to be considered a defining feature, it has to show up in the first 2 levels. So the defining features of the Machinist are actually pretty simple. You have your grazes, which are basically your trick shots, and we changed that to also include what's called suppressive fire. We now call it suppressive graze, but basically that allows you to basically ready an action and act off of your turn, which is kind of interesting. And then the second defining feature we called technologist or sounding sentry. We changed the order of a few things just to make it work as better as a defining feature, but effectively that's all your inventions. So the 2 defining features are graze shots and your inventions. The Marksman, technically, because it focused on just passively improving your ability to hit and do damage. It technically kind of worked somewhat with the Graze shots, but it didn't really. And that's how a subclass should work, is your subclass should modify some aspect of a defining feature of the class. The Tinkerer, on the other hand, you would think would have something to do with the inventions, and it kind of does, but it doesn't. The Tinkerer turns the Machinist into a pet class, but it does it in a weird way. And again, the Tinkerer itself is really underwhelming, because other than your third level ability, which gives you access to your pet, everything else is very passive. You don't really get to make a whole lot of choices as far as how you play your Tinkerer. Everything just kind of, well, you can also do this. It doesn't change how you play the class. It's just you can also do this. Yeah, let's dive into it specifically. At third level, you get Clockwork Companion. Effectively, this is your pet. It works basically identically to the pets that we talked about for the Arcanist, which is kind of weird because, and it's this specific phrase, in combat, the turret acts during your turn. The turret is the Clockwork Companion. The turret acts during your turn. It can move and use its reactions on its own, but its only action it takes is the dodge action, unless you take a bonus action on your turn to command and take another action. So, just like the Arcanist, this is basically making your Clockwork Companions, your turrets effectively, just bonus actions that you equip. Which I liked for the Summoner because it was kind of a unique thing, and they had a lot of variety in it. For the Tinkerer, it doesn't need to be that. Other than that, this is your standard D&D 5th edition pet. If you're incapacitated, it can act independently. If it dies, there are special ways that you can bring it back. It involves money and time invested in it. And it gets more expensive the higher you go. So yeah, it's your standard pet class. Now, the reason, my big suggestion for the Clockwork Companion is to change it to actually work like the rest of the pet classes in 5th edition, and I'll explain why in a second. But this is a suggestion I have: is change the turret acts during your turn to the turret shares your initiative but acts immediately after your turn. The reason why is, if you want this to be a pet class, the pet needs to have its own action. Otherwise, it is literally just extra bonus actions for you. And when you play it, you're not going to feel like you're commanding another creature. You're going to be feeling like, oh, I have, a bonus action. You effectively feel kind of like you're dual wielding, which is fine if you want a dual wielder. But again, if you want this to be a pet class, which I think, a pet subclass, which I think fits better for this than just having, equipable bonus actions, it needs to be on its own turn. It needs to be, okay, I do everything with my Machinist. Now I do everything with my Clockwork Companion. So the player actually gets the feeling of, okay, my Machinist is act, now my pet acts. They are two separate things that I get to control together. They actually feel like they are commanding multiple characters, as opposed to with the Summoner, you are literally just controlling your character, and this other thing is just an extension. It is a dual wielded weapon, which again could be really, really cool if you build the class around that, like I suggested with the Arcanist. For this, let's just turn it back in. I'm not really sure why they're in this supplement, both of the pets that have been shown have used the exact same thing that is different than how they work in 5th edition. my one theory is, and this is really, really common for people that don't play the Beastmaster Ranger effectively, or the Battlesmith Artificer, is they won't understand how pet classes work in 5th edition, and they think that you work at the same time. When you don't, you do your turn first, and then your pet acts. And it's designed that way on purpose. It changes the action economy of how things work, and it changes how you play the class. So my theory, I've not talked to Soren about this. It may be that they had an intention. Maybe they just don't like that, and so they decided to change it. It doesn't work, especially not with the companions. We'll talk about the companions in just a second here, but with how the companions are designed for this, it really doesn't work, because the Clockwork Companions themselves don't do anything. They're the most boring pets I've ever seen. So yeah, my theory is they just didn't understand how pets work in 5th edition, and so it was just a mistake for them to go, it acts on your turn, because if you read this phrase, the turret shares your initiative but acts immediately after you, you could misinterpret that as, oh, well, they share the initiative, they're acting at the same time. So there's no reason to use that phrase, that phraseology. It's just, we can just say that they act at the same time. It's actually a very big difference. And again, it's everything from action economy to how it feels to play it. So yeah, that needs to be changed. Now, the Clockwork Companions themselves, there's two different ones. You have the Rook auto turret and the Bishop auto turret. This actually comes from Final Fantasy XIV. One of the abilities you get near level 50-ish, I think it might be in the 40s that you get it, is you get the ability to summon this auto turret, which is literally just extra damage. That's all it is in Final Fantasy XIV, which works great for an MMO, because there's so many other things and you're doing so many actions all at once that you're not going to get bored with just having something that, literally the way that you activate the Rook auto turret, and eventually it turns into this cool robot, but the way that you actually do it is there are certain shots that will give you energy. As soon as you get 50 energy, you can summon the turret, which literally all you do is you summon it and then you ignore it. You push one button and then you never deal with it ever again. You don't have to place it anywhere. You don't have to do it. You literally just summon it and forget it. You can get up to 100 energy, and anything above 50 just makes it last longer. Now, there actually is an ability that allows you to activate its ultimate ability. Basically, when it gets to the end of its duration, it will do a super powerful attack and then go away until you summon it again by getting enough of energy. And that's how you play the Machinist in Final Fantasy XIV. Build up energy, summon your auto turret or your robot, and then continue doing all your Machinist stuff. But it is the most passive thing in the world. And I have never used the ultimate attack button, because if you just wait for it to go down, it will automatically use that ability. And if you use it early, you're actually losing out on some of the damage, because it's not going to be doing it. Really, the only time you would ever use it early is if the boss is going to be disappearing soon, and you would waste the attack if you don't. That is the only time you would ever use it, and me personally playing it, I've never used that ability. Just because it's so rare that you're ever going to use it. If you know the phases of the boss well enough, you always summon the turret at a point where you're going to get the full benefit of it. So, yeah. So translating that to 5th edition, the two auto turrets, the Rook auto turret is literally just a bonus action D6 damage. That's all it is. The only thing that it can do is it has auto fire, which is a ranged weapon attack. It uses your tech attack bonus to hit. Reach is 60 feet and one target. It hits for 1d6 plus 2 plus your proficiency bonus piercing damage. That's all it is. You get upgraded things, which we'll talk about as they show up in the class. You get upgraded things. The upgraded stance for it increases the damage and makes it stationary. That's it. It's not even an active thing. It just increases the amount of flat damage. It doesn't give you extra dice or anything. It just increases the flat damage. and that's it. And then the final one makes other people do extra damage. But it is so passive, and when we bring it back to the Tinkerer, it literally means your Clockwork Companion, if it acts at the same time you do, and we basically use it as a equipable bonus action, literally the only thing it can do is give you a d6 offhand attack. It is dual wielding by another name, and it's so boring. Especially since this is a pet class. If you go into this thinking, oh cool, I'm gonna have this little auto turret that gets to fly around. Nope. It's an offhand pistol. That's all it is. And it doesn't even do as much damage as a pistol would do. It is a d6 of damage. You effectively have a long-ranged scimitar. That's it. It is so insanely boring. Now, the Bishop auto turret is slightly different. When you first get it, it actually has an area attack where they have to make a save. Anything within 5 feet of the auto turret, so basically a little 15-foot square, effectively. Anything within 5 feet, or a 10-foot circle, I guess would be a better thing. Anything within 5 feet of it makes a proficiency, makes a saving throw. They take a d6 plus intelligence plus proficiency bonus, lightning damage on a failed save, and half as much on a successful. So guaranteed damage, or they have single shock, which is just a d6 of lightning damage. So again, you have a small area bonus attack, which is at least something different, or you have a lightning scimitar in your offhand. That's it. It's massively boring. When we get up to the stance ability, which again I'll talk about what that means in a second here, it actually does have something really interesting. And then the promotion is boring. It's passive again. So again, everything about the subclasses is passive for the Machinist. The Machinist, and this is something that I make this emphasis on a lot. The thing I like about 5th edition is because of the defining features and because of how subclasses work. If you pick different subclasses, you can have an entire party of the same class, and each one can feel special and unique as long as you pick different subclasses. And there's no better example of that than an entirely cleric party or an entirely bard party. And the reason I single those out specifically, the entirety bard party, the reason I single it out is Satine Phoenix actually had a show that she did for a couple years, I believe, called Sirens of the Realms, where it was a D&D game where every single player was a bard, and they just had different subclasses. And through role-playing and things like that, everyone felt unique. Everyone got to have fun and do different things. That's how subclasses are supposed to work. But in order for that to happen, your subclass has to give you choices. It has to give you things that you can do. And all the subclasses thus far have been passive. They don't actually change anything. They just make it easier to hit, or they give you, a slightly extra, you can tack on a little extra damage, which again, that's how the auto turrets work in Final Fantasy XIV. That's not how they can work in D&D, because that's not how a tabletop game works. In an MMO, throughout a boss fight, you are taking hundreds of actions throughout the range of a boss fight. In D&D, throughout the length of a boss fight, you may take 6 actions. And that's a relatively long boss fight. 6 rounds of combat is a decent amount of combat. Going up to 10 rounds generally tends to be an extremely long end game kind of combat. So taking a total of 10 actions for a long combat compared to hundreds means every single one of your actions needs to feel important. And if the action is just, oh, here's some extra damage, it's boring. It's not fun. And as you get to higher levels, just an additional d6 of damage is going to feel less and less useful. Even with the fact that proficiency bonus gets higher and higher, you're still... it's just not as much fun. It feels very underwhelming. So, yeah, the big change for the Clockwork Companion ability itself is make it act after your turn, not on your turn. Because, again, that's how pets work in 5th edition. And it's fine for one class, but having all the quote-unquote pet classes in Final Fantasy XIV work that way kind of shows just a misunderstanding of how pets work in 5th edition. And this one needs to go back to traditional, because that's what you want. You want to be able to have. And that was one of the big issues with the Beastmaster Ranger, was you didn't feel like you had this additional character. It really just felt like you were carrying around some extra hit points that couldn't do anything for you because you didn't get to command it or do anything with it. It was just there. So, yeah, that's my only... I like the idea, and again, it fits with Final Fantasy XIV, but we need to turn it back into a pet for 5th edition and not this equipable bonus actions, especially with how limited the auto turrets are. As far as the auto turrets, this is one where I'm not going to give a quote-unquote suggestion of how it needs to be fixed. And I'll revisit this during final thoughts, but they need to be redesigned. Just flat out, they need to be more unique. They need to do something other than, here's extra damage. Because that works fine for an MMO. It doesn't work in 5th edition D&D. It's just boring at that point. And if that's all you're going to do, let the class dual wield. Because you will get the same mechanical benefits, but it's much cooler to come in wielding a pair of pistols than it is to wield a pistol and then a little, box that acts the same as dual wielding pistols, but now you have to track where it is at any given time. So, yeah. Going to 6th level, you get sensory input. Beginning at the 6th level, you've developed a headpiece which allows you to see what the turret's camera perceives and hear what the turret is able to hear. This is another thing that effectively turns... This is cutting out abilities to spoon feed them back to you to make them seem more valuable than they are. Sensory input, any wizard with a familiar, any class with a familiar can do this built into the familiar. They can see and hear through the familiar. So this is literally going, okay, we're going to give you a familiar, but we're going to cut parts out of it so we can give it back to you instead of giving you something that makes it unique or fun. I'm not a fan of that. It feels cheap, especially since Find Familiar is a first level spell. So a first level wizard can have a familiar that can do more than your pet class can up until 6th level. It just doesn't feel good. Now, the other thing with sensory input is it isn't attached to anything. It doesn't actually say, okay, as an action you can see through their thing. The way that familiars work is as an action you can see through their eyes and hear through their ears, but you become blind and deaf to your own senses, so you can only see them. The way I kind of view sensory input is a heads-up display, which I think would fit with the Machinist really well, where basically you create goggles with an earpiece so that what they see can be superimposed over what you see, and that will make this different than a familiar. For a familiar, in order to see through it, they have to become blind and deaf themselves. This, let's go, no. You have your little view here. You can hear what they hear through the earpiece. And that would be interesting. That would be unique. There still needs to be something attached to it. So my recommendation is at a distance, probably 100 feet, because that tends to be how it works with familiars. For sensory input to work. So basically, as long as they're within 100 feet and you have, and attach it to an item. Attach it to, I'm going to type that in. Attach it to an item. And there we go. Okay, so attach it to an item and add a distance. Make it 100 feet. So as long as it's within 100 feet, and you have your heads-up display on, your goggles with the headpiece, you can see and hear as if you were in there square in addition to your own abilities. That means it's different than what literally every single spellcasting class has access to through one way or another, and quite a few non-spellcasting classes if you take a feat. And I think it fits with how the Machinist is played out. And it would be cool. It would be really cool to go, yeah, I've got a heads-up display. That's super cool and super fun, and I think that would be fun. So the other thing that should happen at 6th level, and we can tie it into sensory input already, is you need to add in that the Clockwork Companion's attacks count as magical in relation to resistance, etc. Because basically what happens is if they don't count as magical, you have to mention that somewhere. And it isn't in the base Clockwork Companion. It shouldn't be at 3rd level, but at 6th level is where you get magical attacks in general for every other class. And if you don't do that, that means a lot of high-end level enemies are going to be either resistant or completely immune to the damage that your auto turrets do, which makes them that much more useless. So just, again, with sensory input, also put in, oh, by the way, their attacks count as magical. Otherwise, they're completely useless after about level 10-ish. Once you get to tier 3, your auto turrets won't be doing anything anymore, and they'll be worthless. So, moving on to 11th level, you get tripod stance. And then moving on to 17th level, you get promoted. Now, if you're wondering why I'm listing these at the same thing, it's because they both do the same thing. They unlock something for your pet. Tripod stance, both auto turrets have a stance thing. The Rook, the one that's just extra damage, their stance is called Root Stance. Its speed becomes 0. It automatically fails all dex saves, which means any area damage is going to destroy your Rook auto turret. Its hit points is 5 plus 5 times your class level. That's not a lot. That's like 1 or 2 area attacks, and because it auto fails all its dex saves when this is on, it's basically worthless. And it costs an action to do it. So as an action, it puts its tripod legs down. And then to get out of tripod stats, it has to use another action. And the benefit of it is the Rook auto turret doubles the proficiency bonus on its attack and damage rolls. So it hits slightly better, and it does slightly more damage. That's it. Again, that is entirely a passive bonus. And this is your level 11 ability for your subclasses. Just, your auto turret hits a little bit more and hits slightly harder. Wow. Again, super, super passive. We get to promotion, the 17th level of ability. As an action, the Rook auto turret releases a field of stimulating energy around itself. Allied creatures within 20 feet of the auto turret deal 2d6 bonus damage when they make a melee or ranged weapon attack for 1d4 rounds. This goes the exact opposite direction. It actually is something that's remarkably useful. And because it's a promotion, you can only use it once per long rest, and that's in the ability itself. Your turret activates their promotion ability for a number of rounds equal to your intelligence modifier rounded down. You must then finish the long rest to use promotion again. Now, this is contradictory because promoted says equal to your intelligence modifier rounded down, whereas promotion for the Rook auto turret says 1d4 rounds. So there's a conflict already built in that doesn't need to be there. With the fact that it adds 2d6 bonus damage for a level 17 ability, with it being a one and done ability, it is flirting with the idea of being a little bit overpowered, because if you pair this with the right class, like pairing it with a monk or pairing it with a fighter, where they get a lot of attacks, this becomes massive. However, if you don't have a bunch of bunch of characters that use weapon attacks in your party, then this becomes completely pointless. So yeah, going to the Bishop auto turret, their stance is called Barrier Stance, and this one actually is interesting. Like the other one, speed becomes 0. It fails. It auto fails dex saves. This is an action to activate, an action to unactivate. But what it does is it creates a barrier that is 10-foot radius centered on itself. So basically a 20-foot diameter sphere of energy. Any creature that attempts to pass through the barrier must make a Constitution check against your Tech save DC. On a failed check, the creature takes 2d6 lightning damage and is paralyzed for 1 round. On a successful save, half damage is taken. The creature is not paralyzed. One thing I will say, for 1 round is really, really easy to argue about when a round begins and ends. So generally that should be something to the effect of until the start of its next turn or until the end of its next turn, depending on how you want it to work. But other than that, that is a really interesting thing. They have to come in contact, so it will only work against creatures that have to go. There's nothing that says you can't shoot through it or it blocks line of sight or anything, so this is literally just something that affects movement. But that can be a really, really useful thing, especially if your Machinist is right next to your auto turret, because then they can be sitting in this barrier of protection, effectively shooting through it, and any melee character that tries to get in range has the chance of becoming paralyzed. And if it does become paralyzed, there's a lot of things you can do. One of the most useful ones would be doing a shove attack. A shove is a contested check, and they will automatically fail the contested check because when you're paralyzed, you auto fail strength and dexterity based checks. So you literally could go up, replace one of your attacks, because you can do this, replace one of your attacks with a shove to get them outside the barrier again, and then fire again at them, because all attacks against them will have advantage when they're paralyzed. It'll also mean anyone that uses melee attacks can come in, and when a creature is paralyzed, any melee attacks made within 5 feet auto crit if they hit. So that can be really, really effective. So that is actually really cool, and I think it's a really interesting thing. Vastly more useful than Root Stance from the Rook auto turret. And then the promotion ability is allied creatures within 20 feet of the Bishop auto turret gain a +3 to their spell save DC and range spell attack bonus for 1d4 rounds. So this basically just makes it harder to save out of their spells and easier to hit with spells. So while the Rook auto turret one is designed mainly for weapons-based character, the Bishop is going to be mainly for spell-based characters. The issue being the Rook actually adds damage, which is really, really useful. With Mana Capacitor only effectively making it so you hit more often or they fail their save a little bit more often, it is nowhere near as effective. It's still somewhat useful, but compared to just the sheer amount of damage that will be put out by effectively a bonus action with Muscle Stimulator, which is the promotion ability of the Rook auto turret, there's no comparison. Like the Rook auto turret promotion is always going to be better than Mana Capacitor, which is the Bishop auto turret. And I don't really see a way to redesign Mana Capacitor to make it work as effectively as Muscle Stimulator. It's one of the reasons I have an issue with Muscle Stimulator, because it's so useful that there's nothing for the Bishop that's ever going to be as useful. And again, when you make a choice where one is always the right choice. It's not really a choice. That's an illusion of choice. You are forcing them to either play subparly, which no one likes doing, or make the quote unquote right to the choice. So yeah, I'm not a fan of both the 11th and 17th level abilities simply being, oh, your pet can do more things. Because that doesn't actually improve the machinist, it improves their pets. And again, if you're treating the pets as additional bonus actions, you can kind of say, oh, we've just given them 2 more bonus actions. But they're not useful bonus actions, to be blunt. And promoted, you only get to use once. It's a one and done ability. So I actually recommend go ahead and leave the tripod stance and promoted. You don't even have to change the stat block because it already says for the stance and promotion on the stat blocks requires machinist level 11, requires machinist level 17. So you can just leave those without having to not give the machinists themselves new abilities at 11th and 17th level. You can just leave those stats there, and your pet gets more powerful as you level up. That makes sense. Let them do that, but actually give the machinist, the tinkerer, give them something they get. So for tripod stance, my suggestion is change it to Clockwork Graze. And Clockwork Graze is when your Clockwork Companion makes a ranged attack, it can add 1 of your Graze attacks to its attack. So effectively, it allows you to use a Graze attack as part of their bonus action attack. Normally for your Graze, you use your bonus action to basically, declare the Graze, and then you can use your action to fire it as one of your attacks. With this, it effectively allows you to make an attack and a Graze as your bonus action, and you get your 2 actions themselves to do normal things. So it just, again, it's actually allowing your pet to do something interesting, and it's letting your pet interact with a defining feature of the class, which is what we will want. So again, really, really simple. It doesn't give you additional uses of the Graze or anything like that. It's not going to unbalance it or anything. It simply allows your pet to feel more powerful. And again, when you treat the pet as a pet and not just bonus actions you put on, that makes it feel better. When you get to go, okay, my turn is done. Now I'm going to do this. And because I used my bonus action to tell him to do this thing, I'm going to have him add on a Graze. It also means for the Clockwork, for the Tinkerer in general, they have to choose between using their Clockwork Companion or making a Graze shot. And this allows them to do both in a single turn. So yeah. For promoted, we're going to change that to Fire at Will. Fire at Will is, as a bonus action, you can command your Clockwork Companion to fire at will against a specific target. Until the target is killed or reduced to 0 hit points, the Clockwork Companion will continue to attack the target without needing to be commanded every turn. The Clockwork Companion can use any ability that would negatively affect the target for the duration of Fire at Will. You can use this ability twice, regaining all uses after a long rest. So first of all, it's not a one and done anymore. Again, I have issues with one and dones because of what we call the elixir paradox, which is basically elixirs are so powerful that people will save them because, well, what if I have another situation where I need it later on, and by the time when you finally beat the final boss, you've got 12 elixirs in your inventory because you never use them because they were just so useful. And that's what happens with one and done abilities is players just won't use them because like, well, there might be a situation where I need this more. Making them 2 and done, literally just adding one additional use, they will use both of those uses significantly more often than they will use a 1 and done ability. So that's that. And then Fire at Will, again, with the idea that you are using, you are making this a pet-based class, being able to designate a target and then have your pet actually get to use all their actions while you get to use all your actions feels really cool. Now you have your bonus action to do graze shots. You have your bonus action to do whatever you want with it. There are feats that you can take for bonus action abilities and other things like that. So it is limited to where it's to a single target. So this isn't like Hunter's Mark where you can just leap it for the duration. No, this is one target, and that's intentional, so it's not massively overpowered. But then you get to feel like I do my turn. Now I get to command my pet, and they do their turn, and it just feels really good. It gives you a slight advantage for action economy. The whole thing is just better. And I specifically mentioned in there, the Clockwork Companion can use any ability that would negatively affect the target. So it isn't just that, okay, now it's only going to attack for all of this. No. Anything that will negatively affect it. So if we look at this just as what's already here, that means the bishop can use barrier stance and use it specifically to harass the enemy. Or it could use mana capacitor, despite the fact that mana capacitor doesn't affect the enemy whatsoever. It simply makes other people be able to hit it more often. That will negatively affect the enemy in a way. So that little phrase there will allow the pets to effectively be able to use their entire kit. But anything they do has to be focused on this one character, or this one to the target. So, yeah. So, final thoughts. Again, overall, as it's written, this is a really, really boring, almost pointless class. Because again, everything is passive. Because of how it's worded, this is just a dual-wielding machinist without the flair. And that's one of the reasons why you dual wield, is because it looks cool, and this doesn't let you to do that. The suggestions I make: turn the Clockwork Companion into a pet again. Don't make it an equipable bonus action. The class is not built for that, and it's more boring. Make it its own pet. Instead of it acts on your turn, it shares your initiative, but it acts after your turn. So it has its own turn. It's not part of your turn. Again, sensory input, add in the magical damage, or else your pets are worthless, and make it limited to a range and to an item, so that there's an actual reason and a way that explains how it's working and why it doesn't work the exact same way as any wizard with a familiar spell. And then tripod stance and promoted, leave those on the blocks themselves, but just make them so that the auto turrets just get better as they level up. Don't prevent the Tinkerer themselves from getting new abilities at 11th and 17th level simply because your pets are going to get more powerful. That seems like you're punishing the Tinkerer for having pets. Now, tripod, we're changing to Clockwork Graze, which lets your auto turrets use your graze attacks. And then promoted, we changed to Fire at Will so they can do cool stuff. So overall, like I said, the Tinkerer could be interesting with the changes that I recommend. With the base class, it is boring and mostly pointless. And again, I will make a special emphasis on there is a reason that pet classes in 5th edition share initiative but act after whomever the pet master is. It's because that changes the action economy. It changes how they feel when you play them. And I agree with that. That is how they're designed to be played, and that's how they should be played. Because this is now the second class that I found that does this thing where they act at the same time, that is a mistake. Again, the last one I'm like, okay, cool. That could be an interesting way to interpret it, but it's not a pet class anymore. It is equipable bonus actions. With this should be a pet class, and let's treat it as that. Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, again, like, subscribe, turn notifications on into the comments down below. What do you guys think about effectively the equipable bonus actions. Like I said, I've seen this twice, and the only way I can explain it is that Soren doesn't understand how pets work in 5th edition, which is a very understandable thing. But now that I've kind of explained why pets work the way they are, do you guys agree with that? Do you think it's just semantics and I'm making a mountain out of a molehill? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today, and I will see you guys in the next time. All right, bye bye.